There has been a topic that I've been considering talking about here for the past several weeks, and I haven't really thought of a different thing to say about it than what anybody else has said about it. Not to mention the fact that, I do have some friends, in a community that this is impacted by. And so that really makes me consider my thoughts on it, at length. But this entire situation with the Dave Chappelle the Netflix special that got him into trouble recently, The Closer, I finally saw something the other day that finally kind of tipped the scales in my mind a little bit. And I did have to come out and say something, and I actually had to say something that I didn't really hear anybody else saying about it. And these are not really things that I'm going to be very happy to say, but I think that somebody does need to come out and say them. And so for anybody who's not especially well versed in this particular controversy, recently Dave Chappelle put out his most recent comedy special on Netflix. They called it The Closer. And there's a part in it where he gets to talking about some of the LGBTQ politics, particularly related to the transsexual community. And so he talks about how, a lot of these activists, some of the more ruthless ones, how they've targeted people like, they targeted people like J.K. Rowling and basically tried to destroy her career. And he basically said, well, I don't like that. Like, if you're out trying to destroy people because they have an opinion about something that's controversial that you don't like, you pretty much, you push me into the opposing camp. And Dave Chappelle actually went so far as to say that he's quote unquote, Team TERF. And so Dave Chappelle has been targeted recently. They've actually picketed outside the Netflix offices and tried to have his new special taken down. They probably don't want him to ever be able to do another one. At least not on Netflix. There's a documentary movie that he worked on, that he made, that apparently he had all kinds of engagements at different film festivals around the world to go and show it. And now all of that's kind of just been rolled up. Like, he's out looking for another distributor for this documentary film that he made, which is really too bad. But I actually did get to see, I actually hadn't even watched it. And I haven't watched it in full just yet. But I did see a portion of it the other day, and it changed my mind about absolutely everything about it. And so in this section of this, in this segment of this comedy special, he talked about his friend Daphne. And Daphne was a white transsexual woman. I saw a picture of Daphne, and she was definitely all out there with it. Bleach blonde hair, big on her chest. So she definitely went all in on this. And as it turns out, the one thing that Daphne wanted to do more than anything was be a stand-up comic. And that was what brought her and Dave Chappelle together, and what made them such good friends. Despite the fact that Dave Chappelle at the beginning of this relationship, he definitely was not very comfortable with transsexuals. And so they became friends, and he even allowed her to come on stage and be the opener for one of his shows. And then he came over and he took it over, did the rest of the show, and they wound up having like this long conversation back and forth. And it was almost like, she did this opening, and apparently her opening wasn't very good, but she wasn't very experienced, like just still learning this craft of stand-up comedy. But she still managed to really take the show over at the end, in a way that was not really aggressive. It wasn't really, wasn't really offensive to anybody. Everybody that was there apparently loved it. And in the end, Daphne did get to be the closer. And Dave Chappelle spent a lot of time after that kind of mentoring her whenever he had the opportunity to. And so the first time that Dave Chappelle ran into trouble with the transsexual community, she was one of his loudest supporters. She was one who came out and said, hey, listen, I know him. He doesn't hate transsexual people. Dave is full of love. All the kind of stuff that he said. It's like, he just tells jokes. That's all he does. It's like, it's all just jokes. And apparently the transsexual community, or rather I should say, let me walk that back a little bit. Let me flesh that out. A certain segment of the transsexual community turned on Daphne. And apparently they went on Twitter and they drug her out for days and just mocked her, vilified her. And then a few days after that, Daphne committed suicide. Now Dave Chappelle has come out and he said that he doesn't blame anybody in the trans community for Daphne's suicide. It could have been for any number of other different reasons. We don't really know for sure. But I think the one thing that we can say for absolute certain is that whatever else might have been going on in Daphne's life at that time that pushed her towards that kind of treatment, probably wasn't helpful. And so I don't think it's unreasonable to say that even if they are not those individuals, who got together and did this, who were not directly responsible for her death, I think it is fair to say that they definitely played a hand in it. I mean, feel free to let me know in the comments if you think so. But I don't think that's unreasonable. And so that really colored kind of changed my perception of some of the response to Dave Chappelle's comments, specifically about, standing up saying that he was, that it's not cool to destroy people's careers just because you don't agree with their opinion on a controversial subject. Like all of this LGBTQ stuff. And now I see the people that came out and objected to that very hard, in a different way. Because now I look at all of that, and at least in a portion of it, I think that I can detect at least a portion of that that's tinted with guilt. People that watched the special, they were kind of reminded, about just how bloodthirsty this particular community, elements of this particular community can become. And when somebody stands between them and that blood, the way that they'll turn on them. And I think they looked at that and they said, they must have to realize that they've done some damage within their own community. That they've definitely hurt people who dissented within their community. And now they just want to take this thing away so that nobody's reminded of that. I mean, I do think that some of it is about power. I think that there's a large portion of those people that do want to be, as powerful as they can be, and to make sure that they can make people suffer that stand up and have a different opinion than them. Look at some of the way that some of the behavior. It's a little, it's a little bit hard to not reach that conclusion. But I think that deep down they must realize that as powerful as they could ever become, never in their life are they ever going to be powerful enough to give Daphne her life back. They can only ever be so powerful as to delete the thing that reminds people of the role that they almost certainly must have played in this woman's suicide. They can't change the damage they've done within their own community, but they can hide it. And I think that that's a big portion, at least in some circles, of what this whole, this controversy over the Dave Chappelle special is really about. And I hope that Netflix stands tough, that they stand their ground and they make sure that that special remains up so that people do get to see that and understand that happened. And if that means that these people may someday actually have to fully embrace, the guilt that I think they must feel over this woman's death, I think that's probably for the better.